Vince McMahon is a curious beast. Obviously one of the most successful parts of pro wrestling ever. It seems that he does go hot and cold on elements within his own promotion depending how he feels when he wakes up. I mean, that's his prerogative, it's his company, but as a fan, it can be really confusing. What exactly should I care about? This goes for individual wrestlers too. Look at Mojo Rawley. If you really cared about his blue face and mirror obsession, it was stolen away from you because he just stopped appearing. He was sometimes down on main event, sure, but not even WWE cares about that, so why should we? This is just the way of the world, though. Like it or lump it, I suppose. I'm Simon from WhatCulture. This is 10 things WWE suddenly wanted you to care about after programming you to hate it. Number 10, women's wrestling. I mean, WWE always wanted you to care about women on their roster, it was just the approach that changed, and thank goodness it did. If you go back and watch anything from the Attitude Era that features a female, you'll want to throw your face into the sofa, maybe even a wall, because it's quite unbelievable. What a terrible fan base we were. Essentially just segments for Jerry Lawler to shout over. Matches weren't really matches, and plenty of wrestlers have come out and said they were actually told not to fight like the men. They had to slap each other and roll around on the floor. It's kinda ridiculous. This all changed in 2015 when AJ Lee called out Stephanie McMahon, who was being a very vocal supporter of women in sports, and it was only here that the revolution started and parity became the norm. It started in NXT because of course it did, and as momentum increased, WWE made this a whole thing in order to squeeze as much marketing juice out of it as possible. Didn't matter they were behind the times or that beforehand they had gone in the complete other direction. Now from nowhere, they wanted you to care about women's wrestling. What a concept. If the ends justify the means, I guess it's okay, and at least today the balance is far better. It's no less than what anyone deserves. Women can wrestle. Let them wrestle. Number 9, WCW. For years, WWE told us that World Championship Wrestling was scum. It made sense given they were deep in competition with their rivals, but still, that's what happened, and if you supported the enemy, you were held in equal disdain, even though every fan under the sun was basically watching both shows as best they could. When it came to a close in 2001 though, when WWE literally bought them, there was a change of pace. Vince McMahon still wanted you to know that his brand was superior, but he also needed you to buy into WCW because he wanted to recreate it in his image. That was going to be tough because again, you've been fed this line for almost 5 years, and to undo all that wasn't going to be like clicking your fingers. This is why when Monday Night Raw went to Washington and presented a WCW main event, everybody was running a huge risk. How are you going to get a World Wrestling Federation crowd to just smile and cheer when two people who had been told to despise were in the ring? The answer was we weren't. Instead, Buff Bagwell and Booker T were booed mercifully as the universe refused to accept what they were seeing, and it resulted in all WCW plans being shelved, and ultimately the biggest storyline botch in history as the invasion angle flopped. This one bout also ended Bagwell's WWE run, and meant Booker T was now tasked with an even harder battle. Can't undo the past. Number 8, Jinder Mahal. I like Jinder Mahal, and I mean that. Listen to any interview with the man and you'll be inspired, and I don't begrudge anyone having an opportunity. No one else would turn it down, so why should Mahal be subject to different rules? If you think otherwise, think again. Don't hinder Jinder. However, logic is also important in those situations, and seeing Mahal go from basically an opening match wrestler to the world champion in 2 weeks, well, it made no sense. And don't forget, it was WWE who had positioned him at the bottom of the card, hence why the audience had assumed this is where he was meant to be, and from nowhere he was in the main event. It's truly baffling. It got more convoluted when rumours leaked out that the catalyst for this push was to try and tie into the massive audience in India, but even that didn't hit a chord because it's crazy thinking. To assume Indian fans just want to support Indian wrestlers is ludicrous. Much like most of the human race, they want to see stars like Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. That's like assuming the only person in the entire world I want to see get pushed is Pete Dunne. It's always cool and he deserves it, but I am capable of more. You gotta give the fans more credit. It didn't work because it wasn't ever going to, and the worst bit was Jinder suffered coming out the other side. Punished for doing what was asked of him. It's not fair. Number 7, Curtis Axel. Much like Jinder, in May 2013, WWE tried something similar with Curtis Axel, and they got similar results. A change of name and looking to his father and grandfather for inspiration, we were all meant to assume this was our new top player. It was cemented by Paul Heyman being his mouthpiece, and WWE kinda just hoped this 180 presentation and family lineage would be enough to get fans on board. It was not. Aside from it being too sudden, his feud with Triple H was booked as if we were trying to achieve the opposite. The game walked into this match wounded and still beat Axel, leaving most fans to simply go, well, I guess Curtis isn't as good as Trips. That's fair too, it's exactly what we had just seen in front of our eyes. It was made worse given that Hunter was still selling injuries suffered by Brock Lesnar, which just pushed Axel down the card further. He ain't Triple H, he ain't the Beast. Today, he ain't really anything of note, just Bo Dallas's friend. Number 6, Baron Corbin. Baron Corbin is such a curious beast. Overexposed in late 2018, it led other wrestlers like Seth Rollins to go out live on Raw and say things like, "Under your leadership, Monday Night Raw sucked. It sucked because of you. That roster, that locker room back there, that is some of the most talented men and women that Monday Night Raw has ever seen, and you've got no idea what to do with it. This whole Baron Corbin experience has been an abject failure." Now, don't forget Seth was scripted to say this, and it surely summed up WWE thoughts on Baron, or how it realized they had put him on TV too much. Either way, it did nothing for his character, which is why it was beyond interesting when, after Rollins had won the Universal title from Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, WWE chose his next opponent as Baron Corbin. What exactly am I meant to do with that? It was met with confusion by fans given all the mixed messages, especially as people were still irked by the fact Corbin had retired Kurt Angle at the show of shows. Really, we just needed a break from Baron, which is why keeping him off Raw and then bringing him back to win the King of the Ring kinda worked. We do need to treat Corbin with kid gloves from this point out, but I tell you, with the right moves, he will be okay. That was not what was happening at the tail end of 2018, and it was just too much, even meaning the McMahons had to come out and apologize to us for all their mistakes. It didn't change anything, but the fact they felt the need to do this in the first place. Number 5, Survivor Series. This one is great because it comes from Vince McMahon's own mouth. In 2010, during a conference call, he actually said, "We think Survivor Series is obsolete." So there you go. Went on to clarify it worked many years ago, but it has now outlasted its usage. Now I get why he said this. It's because the event had dropped 26.3% year to year, but it's quite funny to hear that only for it to roll around again and WWE hype it up like it's the best thing ever. To be fair to Vinnie Mac, I see what he meant. The concept was born originally to compete with Jim Crockett in a pay-per-view versus pay-per-view war around Thanksgiving, and in the modern day, the idea of super teams, such as the Dark Side or the Underdogs, just wasn't as appealing. The world had changed and WWE was going to phase this out until the idea that was going to take its place, that being bragging rights, wasn't really a massive success. This is all even better because now we are still meant to care about the show. It usually does become Raw versus SmackDown, even though in 2019 especially that concept was run into the ground, a factor which doubled towards the end of the year when we had another draft due to SmackDown moving to Fox. You can't have wrestlers coming out and say that Raw sucks after they were only there a month ago, and really Survivor Series needs something so it can stack up to WrestleMania, the Royal Rumble and SummerSlam to remain as one of the big four. Either way, when the owner says who gives a damn, fans are unlikely to give a damn. Number 4, Goldberg. I never understand why WWE does this. When Goldberg debuted in the promotion in 2003, everybody was pumped because of course they were. All we wanted was for Bill to run through some stars who had been fighting against WCW because we'd never seen it. Instead, the Intense Destroyer was gone, and in its place was a guy who got beaten up a lot, then sold a lot, and triggered his comeback. Comeback? Goldberg didn't need a comeback. He speared people half to death, jackhammered them, and was in the back before fans knew what had happened. It soon became clear that WWE wanted to recreate him in their own image, even though that was never going to work. Triple H ran him down too when during an interview years later he said Bill was a guy he could never have a classic match with, and that if there were any rumors about Goldberg going into the Hall of Fame, he probably started them. Quite clear what the deal was. The final proof was years later when WWE needed a shot on the arm, so went back to Goldberg, and guess what? He not only got in the Hall of Fame, but reignited his career by being an Intense Destroyer. Who knew, eh? Sometimes keeping things simple is best. Number 3, Hulk Hogan. The Hulk Hogan roller coaster usually depends on what Vince McMahon thinks about the Hulkster at any given time. In 1996 he was past it and old, but in 2002 he was a timeless legend. That maths doesn't add up, by the way. But from being ruined in those infamous billionaire Ted skits to having one more world title run after the fact, WWE did utterly change their tack post WCW's demise by putting Hulk Hogan back atop his throne and carving his face back onto the wrestling version of Mount Rushmore. It all began at WrestleMania 18 when he and The Rock rewrote what a good wrestling match is meant to be, and for a couple of years after this, Hogan was in Vince's good books once more. There's been plenty of ups and downs ever since then, and who knows more about ups and downs than me, and you'd have to assume there will be more. But every time WWE tells you that Hogan was overrated and not as important as you thought, we're only a few weeks away from the reverse also being true. So Surprised anybody gets into wrestling these days. So damn hard. Number 2, The Ultimate Warrior. The self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior DVD was incredible in the literal sense. A project designed just to bury a former talent, it was aimed at fans who liked Jim Hellwig, and yet this was just a lot of people calling him an asshole. Not only that, but Warrior was framed as a crazy egomaniac that was impossible to work with. He was called stupid, accused of hating the business, and that he only ever cared about himself. This was an eye-opener for many 80s kids who had grown up thinking the Ultimate One was the best wrestler ever, which simply meant if you thought otherwise, you were stupid. That was the one big takeaway from this. And yes, he was a very controversial figure with some truly unforgivable speeches in his closet, but it was still quite the turnaround when after this, WWE reached out to the Warrior and put him in the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying it wasn't earned, but how on earth do you go from saying this guy was rubbish to, oh no wait, he was one of the best ever in only 10 years? We know the answer, but still, it's mad. Number 1, independent wrestling. When Daniel Bryan debuted in WWE in 2010, the fact he was an indie wrestler was used to bury him. He was reduced to a guy who just performed in gyms in front of 50 nerds, and the only people who knew who he was were obsessed with the internet and dirt sheets. I mean, there are some people like that, but it was an unfair brush to swipe. At the same time, Wade Barrett was being promoted as a talent who would come through WWE's then developmental lab FCW as the finished article, specifically because he had been filtered and made in that system. Barrett was far more than that, of course, but the idea was indie worker equals bad, polished FC worker equals good. It didn't work like that, however, as when they made their way to the main roster, a lot of the indie darlings smashed it, forcing WWE to rethink their approach. I mean, it's basically what NXT was built on, as these stars arrive on takeover events and get huge reactions every time. This was not the case 9 or so years ago when it was an albatross you needed to get off your back. Think about that as well. You go out there to learn your craft and better yourself, and somebody at the top of the tree tells you that was bad. You tell me, because as always, I don't know. Know of any other things WWE all of a sudden wanted you to care about? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to WhatCulture.com and read yourself some articles, and follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. My name is Simon from WhatCulture, and I will chat to you again soon.